How to listen your way to understanding. This briefing covers how to tackle structured, intensive listening well. We will cover the essential skills, how to actually conduct these conversations so that people tell you the truth. And we will cover the methodology, how to structure this phase so that you can accommodate different communication styles and get comprehensive insight into a compressed time frame. Because here's what we know, the CEOs who take time to listen deeply, who create real psychological safety, who use multiple modalities to gather input, they make better decisions faster once they move into action. They waste less time, they build more trust, and they're far more likely to still be in the role 2 years later because they diagnosed the right problems. The people in this organisation have theories about why you are where you are and what needs improvement. Lots of them. Sales think it's a product problem. Product thinks it's a go-to-market problem. Marketing thinks sales isn't executing. And engineering thinks the whole strategy is simply wrong. Everyone has a story about what leadership did or didn't do. Of course, some of these theories are right. Most are partial truths. A few are completely wrong but deeply believed. And your job is to figure out which is which. But here's the challenge. People won't tell you the real story unless they trust you. And they don't trust you yet. You're new. You've seen leaders come before, make big pronouncements, change everything, and fail. They are waiting to see if you are different. So the diagnostic phase isn't just about gathering data. It's about building trust whilst you gather data. It's about creating conditions where people will tell you the uncomfortable truths about strategy, about leadership, culture, about themselves. And it's about doing this in a way that acknowledges a simple reality. People communicate differently. Some people process out loud and are great in conversation. Others need time to think and are better in writing. Some are comfortable speaking up, others fear putting themselves out there. So if you only use one method, just one-on-one conversations, or just a survey, you will miss huge pieces of the picture. That's why the methodology matters as much as the skills. So let's start with the interpersonal capabilities you need to conduct these conversations well. Even if you use multiple methods, surveys, group sessions, written input, you're still going to spend dozens of hours in one-on-one conversations. And those conversations will only be valuable if people are honest with you. The first skill is active listening, but not the kind you do in normal business conversations. This is listening to understand the system, not just to respond to the person in front of you. You're listening for patterns. When 3 people in different departments mention the same frustration, that is a signal. When someone's energy changes when talking about a particular topic, that's data. When someone is vague or hedges, that tells you something about psychological safety. This means you're listening on multiple levels simultaneously. You're listening to the content, what they're actually saying. You're listening to the emotion, how they feel about it. And you're listening for themes, how this connects to what you've heard from others. Practically, this means a few things. First, you're comfortable with silence. When you ask a question and they pause to think, you wait. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. You don't fill that gap. That pause is where the real thinking happens. Second, you're reflecting back to confirm understanding, not parroting their words, but paraphrasing. So what I'm hearing is that the sales team doesn't trust the product roadmap because priorities keep shifting. Am I getting that right? This does 2 things. It confirms you understood, and it signals that you're actually listening. Third, you ask follow-up questions that go deeper. When someone says the strategy isn't clear, you ask, tell me more about that. What would clarity look like? When they say we have a collaboration problem, you ask, can you give me a specific example of when that showed up recently? The second skill is reading body language and emotional signals. This matters because what people don't say is often more important than what they do say. When someone crosses their arms when you ask them about the executive team, that's information. When their voice gets tight talking about resource, information. When they look at the door whilst discussing culture, information. You're not psychoanalyzing people, you're noticing patterns. And here's what you're looking for. Where do people lean in? Where do they pull back? What topics generate energy and what topics shut them down? 3 different people go flat when you ask about strategy. That tells you something about strategy. If people light up when talking about customers but get resigned when talking about internal operations, That tells you something about where they find meaning. And you're managing your own body language too. You are staying open, uncrossed arms, forward lean, consistent eye contact. You are staying calm when you hear surprising or frustrating things. Because if you visibly react, if you look shocked or defensive or upset, people will start filtering what they tell you. The third skill is creating psychological safety within each conversation. This is the foundation of everything. Psychological safety does not mean being nice. It means people can tell you hard truths without fear of retaliation. It means they can admit mistakes without career damage. It means they can disagree with you without risking their own safety. You build this through explicit statements and behavioural demonstration. Explicitly, you say things like, I need to hear dissenting views. The worst outcome is silence. Nothing you share will be used against you or anyone else. I am here to understand, not to judge. But more important than what you say is what you do when someone takes a risk. When someone shares bad news, you thank them. You stay calm. You ask questions to understand, not to blame. When someone disagrees with you, you welcome it. I'm glad you're pushing back. Tell me more about your thinking. When someone admits a mistake, you normalise it. Everyone admits mistakes. What did you learn? What would you do differently? You focus on the system, not the person. What about our process contributed to this? Every time you respond well to someone taking a risk, everyone else sees it, and they update their assessment of whether it's safe to be honest with you. The fourth skill is managing difficult emotions in conversations, both others and your own. You are going to hear things that make you angry. Decisions by previous leadership that were clearly wrong. Problems that should have been addressed years ago. Waste, dysfunction, things that you want to fix immediately. Your job is to absorb that and stay regulated. Because if you get visibly angry or frustrated, people will stop telling you things. They will start managing you instead of informing you. When someone gets emotional in a conversation with you, if they get angry or start crying, you don't shut it down. You give them space. You might say, take your time, or I can see this really matters to you. Perhaps offer a tissue if they're crying. You slow the pace. When someone gets angry, you stay calm. You don't match their energy. You acknowledge without necessarily agreeing. I hear your frustration, or it sounds like this has been really difficult. And you gently redirect to specifics. Help me understand exactly what happened. The key is staying present and regulating yourself whilst creating space for their emotion. Because that emotion is data. It's telling you what matters, what hurts, where the pain points are. The fifth skill is questioning, the questioning technique. The questions you ask determine what you learn. You're using mostly open-ended questions, not yes-no questions, not leading questions. Questions that invite explanation. What's been your experience with the product launch process? How do you see the collaboration between your team and marketing? Tell me about a time when a customer was frustrated with us. You are asking for specifics. When someone makes a general statement, communication is bad here, you ask for an example. Can you tell me about a recent situation where the communication broke down and what happened? You're asking forward-looking questions. What would success look like 12 months from now? If you could change one thing, what would it be? What opportunities are we missing? And you're avoiding questions that put people on the defensive. Early in your tenure, you don't ask, why didn't you, or who is responsible for? Those questions sound like blame. Instead, you ask, what made that difficult? What would have needed to have been different for that to have worked? The sixth skill is empathy without losing your own perspective. You need to understand how things feel from their vantage point, even if you disagree with their conclusions. When someone tells you the previous CEO never listened to us, you might think, actually they had regular one-to-ones. But their experience was that they weren't heard. That experience is real, even if your interpretation of the facts is different. So you validate the experience. That must have been really frustrating, or I can see why you'd feel that way. You don't have to agree with the conclusion to acknowledge their feelings. This is cognitive empathy, understanding their perspective, and emotional empathy, recognizing and naming the emotion, Both matter. But you maintain your own perspective. You are not taking responsibility for every problem. You are not agreeing with every assessment. You're understanding the reality whilst maintaining yours. The balance is compassionate enough to connect, boundaried enough to lead. Now let's talk about how to structure this diagnostic phase to actually work. Because even if you have all the skills, if your methodology doesn't account for how different people communicate, you will get an incomplete picture. Here's the reality. Some people think out loud. They are great in conversations. Others need time to process, and they are much better in writing. Some people are comfortable speaking up in any context. Others fear being identified and need anonymity. Some people are spontaneous and give their best insights in that moment. Others need advance notice to give thoughtful answers. If you only do one-on-one conversations, you'll miss insights from writers, preparers, and the people who don't feel safe speaking up directly. If you only do a survey, you'll miss the depth and nuance that comes from conversation. The answer is deliberately using multiple modalities. You need anonymous surveys, sharing in advance questions for those who want to prepare, one-on-one conversations for depth, small group discussions for team dynamics, and ongoing channels for follow-up thoughts. So let's walk through what this actually looks like. You could start with an anonymous survey in week 1 or 2. This solves multiple purposes. First, it gives voice to people who aren't comfortable speaking up. Maybe they're junior, maybe they're in a function that hasn't been heard before, maybe they're just introverted or cautious. The survey lets them contribute honestly. Second, it gives you baseline data across the organisation. You can see patterns before you start conversations, so this will help you know where to dig deeper. Third, it provides permission. When you're in a conversation, you say a lot of people mention collaboration challenges in the survey. Suddenly it's safer for the person in front of you to talk about it as well. It's not just them, it's a pattern. The survey should be short, 15 to 20 minutes maximum. Mix quantitative questions with scales and qualitative open-ended questions. Ask about company performance, strategy, clarity, execution challenges, culture, and what they'd change if they could. Critical, make it truly anonymous. Use a third-party tool, no email collection, make all questions optional, and commit to sharing the high-level results afterwards. If people think you're just doing a checkbox exercise, they won't be honest. Once you've launched the survey, you start scheduling one-on-one conversations, all of your executive team, all directors and senior managers, and a sample of managers and individual contributors. This will take you into week 3 through 6 or so. And here's what's different from typical one-on-ones. You send the questions 3 to 5 days in advance. Not a requirement to prepare, optional. The email could say something like, I'm looking forward to our conversation. This is a listening session for me. I would like to understand your perspective on what's working and what's not. There are no wrong answers, and nothing you say will be used against anyone. If it's helpful to think about these in advance, here are some topics I'd like to explore. What's your experience been here? What do you think has contributed to our growth challenges? What would you prioritise? No preparation is required. Do whatever works best for you. So this does several things. It reduces anxiety about being put on the spot. It gives preparers time to think. It signals transparency and safety. And it respects different thinking styles. Some people will prepare thoroughly and others will just glance at it, everybody. The conversations themselves follow a structure, but they're not rigid. You start broad. Tell me about your role and what's your experience been like here. And then move to more strategic questions. How would you describe our current situation? What do you think is driving our growth challenges? Then get tactical. What's working in your area? What's not? And what do you need to be more effective? Then you invite open door. What else should I know and what haven't I asked? You're taking notes by hand. Laptops open breaks connection. You're staying fully present. You're using all those skills we talked about, active listening, reading signals, creating safety and managing emotion. Critically, schedule buffer time between those conversations, 20 to 30 minutes to process, transfer notes and reset yourself because this work is exhausting. you are absorbing organisational pain and you will need recovery time between sessions. Alongside one-on-ones, you're also running small group sessions, 5 to 8 people, usually peer groups, all directors, all managers, all engineers, all salespeople. The groups, when you're already doing one-on-ones, bring a different dynamic. They will reveal things that individual conversations don't. You will see how teams work together. You'll hear collective wisdom, people building on each other's ideas, and concerns get normalised. It's not just me that thinks this. Groups require different facilitation skills. You're managing participation, drawing out quiet people, and redirecting dominators. You're handling disagreement productively. You're surfacing patterns without forcing consensus. But groups are powerful. A well-facilitated group session can surface in 90 minutes what might take 6 one-on-ones to uncover. Finally, create alternative channels for people who don't fit the standard modalities. You often written responses, same questions as the one-on-ones, but in a document they can fill out in their own time. No judgment about length or polish. You have drop-in office hours, 2 hours a week where people can just show up, no agenda, lower pressure than a scheduled conversation. You create an anonymous follow-up channel, a Google form or a suggestion box. After a conversation, if you think of anything else, and then you must review it weekly. You might even allow a sync video or audio. Record responses on Loom or in a voice memo for people who process verbally but not in person. The point is you are giving people as many ways as possible to get information to you because you want a comprehensive understanding, not just input from people who are comfortable in the modalities that you prefer. As you're going through this process, you are constantly synthesizing. After each conversation, you're transferring notes and looking for patterns. At the end of each week, you're reviewing themes across all the input that you've gathered. You're asking, what am I hearing from multiple people? What's showing up across different levels and functions? Where are perspectives diverging? What's supported by data versus perception? You're distinguishing signal from noise. If one person mentions something, it might be an individual grievance. If 30% of people mention it, it's systemic. If people across departments and levels describe the same problem, you have found something real. You're tracking not just what people say, but how they say it. High emotional intensity matters. Consistency of narrative matters. Specific examples matter more than vague claims. And you're testing hypothesis. You develop working theories. I think growth stalled because of X. Then, in subsequent conversations, you test that. I've heard a pattern about X. Does that match your experience? What would suggest that it's not true? You're holding your theories lightly. You're staying curious. You're updating based on new information. Because your goal isn't to confirm what you already think, it's to understand what is actually true. By week 7 or 8, patterns should be clear. You know the top 5 to 7 themes. You understand where the organisation is aligned and where there's divergence. You have a sense of what's broken, what's working, and what capabilities you have to work with. Now you can start planning action, not before. Let me close with this. Every CEO faces the temptation to skip this diagnostic phase or rush through it. You feel pressure to show action. Your bias towards doing things kicks in. You're anxious to prove that you were the right hire. But the CEOs who succeed at restarting growth understand you cannot fix what you don't understand, and you can't understand in 2 weeks what took years to create. The diagnostic phase done well is not time wasted. It is the foundation for everything that comes next. The relationships you build, the trust you establish, the understanding you develop, these determine whether the organisation will follow you when you start making changes. And here's what makes this different from a typical getting to know everyone activity. You're deliberately using multiple modalities to accommodate how people actually communicate. You're creating real psychological safety so people tell you the truth. You're synthesizing systematically to find patterns, and you're moving with urgency through the listening phase so you can move to action with confidence. The CEOs who do this well make fewer mistakes in the next year. They build more trust. They're more likely to still be there in 2 years because they diagnose the right problems.